But I was a child, and the child opens his eyes in the world, he has to use what he sees. There's nothing else to use. And you are formed by what you see, the choices you have to make, and the way you discover what it means to be black in New York. I don't know how you discover what it means to be black in London, but I know what it means, how you discover that in New York, and then throughout the entire country. And I know how, as you grow older, you watch in the richest city in the world, and the most famous, the richest, freest nation in the world, in the Western world. I know how you watch as you grow older, literally, and this is not a figure of speech, the corpses of your brothers and your sisters pile up around you, and not for anything they have done. They were too young to have done anything. In any case, too helpless. But what one does realize is that when you try to stand up and look the world in the face like you had a right to be here, when you do that, without knowing that this is the result of it, you have attacked the entire power structure of the Western world.
Well, it's been a year since the inception of the black curriculum, and I got a chance to look back at some of the books that I read and reviewed, and the recurring themes that were written by black authors, poets, activists that remind us of the Pan-African soul and mind. And then I thought, why did it take me so long to read and discuss one of the greatest 20th century minds? I'm referring to none other than the author, playwright, and Harlemite, James Baldwin. The first of many books that I'll read by James Baldwin is called The Fire Next Time, which is comprised of 2 letters. The first is called My Dungeon Shook, and the second is called Down at the Cross. So here's how I'll break down a dense and somewhat haunting piece of work. I'll address 3 points. His past, Baldwin's take on world history, and more importantly, the unchanging human condition within it. His present, what it would be like to be a black man or black woman in America in the 1960s, at a time where a lot of people say that the civil rights or the fight for civil rights were at its peak. And I'll end by talking about our future, the inevitable paradoxical shift that is coming for the US. As I mentioned, he starts with My Dungeon Shook. Now the reader quickly finds out that they're reading a heartfelt warning to his 14-year-old nephew, while at the same time recounting on Baldwin's experiences, his life experiences, that led him up to writing this warning. Now what's the warning, you might ask? Well, here's where things get interesting. My interpretation of the letter was simply this. Baldwin was essentially informing his nephew, his 14-year-old nephew, about what life would be like growing up as a young black conscious man in America. Not everything will play in his favor. You see, especially in the 1960s, Negroes were reduced to drinking, dining, and congregating in designated areas. If white supremacy was agitated or questioned in public, then black folk were met with fire hoses, attack dogs, and police brutality. Integration was non-negotiable at that time because African Americans didn't have their civil rights. And at the age of 14, James Baldwin himself woke up to the reality that he, among other wrongdoers around him, were products of the same wretched circumstances. It would seem as if black and brown folks were cursed. Now, some might say that black Americans have inherited the curse of Ham, meaning that our ancestry is linked to oppression that has been recorded in the Old Testament. Is this curse true? Has this oppression been passed down to us? Now let's discuss his present day with this quote. You know and I know that this country is celebrating 100 years, and 100 years too soon. We cannot be free until they are free. God bless you, James, and Godspeed. James Baldwin here is referring to the Emancipation Proclamation, a proclamation that freed slaves. Great. The chains were off, the inhumane manual labor had ended, but the hatred towards black Americans persists. Now his second letter, Down at the Cross, is more about how black folk fit into the American agenda, if at all. Now this is not a life of luxury and privilege, but rather a paradoxical life. A life that constantly reminds you that you neither belong on American soil or back in Africa. And by the word belong, I mean being able to afford the rights to those who are at the high end of the racial ladder. This paradox that Baldwin speaks of is linked to W.E.B. Du Bois' double consciousness. And I personally believe that this paradox, realizing that you don't belong in a country that you were born in, nor being able to go back to your homeland, Africa, is part of what led a lot of African Americans to join the Nation of Islam. a pro-black Muslim organization that denounced the social status, plight, and power of the white man in America. Now, although I don't subscribe to that of the Muslim religion, I do admire the fact that what they were doing and how they did it was funded by them. They understood the importance of black commerce and black community. But calling white folks devils, I can't rock with that. But what I can imagine is how Baldwin was introduced to the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. That dinner scene will have to be a treat for you all to read. I'm not going to spoil it. And now we get to our future. Similar to Michael Eric Dyson's Tears We Cannot Stop, a sermon to white America, Baldwin gives insight to the black experience by explaining that due to the powers that be, a lot of black folk end up knowing more about white America than white folk in America. I think Baldwin recognizes that we have been, in some way, a perpetual fly on the wall. And in our experiences, we see more than the visual representation. We hear more than what's being uttered. And most of us hold secrets given to us by white Americans, not so much because of the rapport that they have with us, but because of our perceived social immobility. Now here's where things shift. You see what I did there? Social immobility, shift? Yeah? No? Okay. Since Baldwin was a man of semantics, I'll define what I mean by social immobility. I'm referring to our strength, our resilience, our foundation in faith that will not be moved or shaken. Now, history has already given testament to our social mobility and progress as a people, but there's an element that's missing. There will come a time when the first shall be last and the last shall be first. And there will come a time when those who have been oppressed will have had enough. I'm talking about the fire next time. This has been the Black Curriculum.